One, two, three, testing. Good. Hi, friends. I'm a grateful follower of Jesus Christ, and my name is Wayne. I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I sponsor other men. My sobriety date is January the 1st, 1986. I'd like to start tonight with the set-aside prayer. God, please enable me to set aside everything I think I know for an open mind and a new experience. Help me see the truth about these meetings, the 12 steps, and about you, dear God. I say this prayer as a reminder because I can be a know-it-all, and I need a new experience with all these things. And with the help of the 12 steps, I have been able to see the truth. Well, sometimes. Have to remember that this is a program of perfection, of progress, not perfection. I'm not there yet, not perfect. I have, with God's help, recovered from an alcohol addiction, food addiction, sex addiction, and pornography addiction. Yes, I said recovered, because I believe the 12 steps and Scripture both repeatedly say that we will be restored, transformed, sustained, nurtured, body, mind, and spirit, i.e., recovered. James 5:16, therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. Healed, not cured. If I had a gunshot wound and it has healed, I could say I have recovered from that gunshot wound, but I'm not immune from bullets the rest of my life. I still could be shot again. Also, recovered is a sign of hope for the newcomers. Newcomers come to us looking for hope. Hope that they won't have to continue to live in the pain that they're experiencing right now. My experience is I was driven to recovery only when the pain in my life was unbearable. I believe our job in recovery is to give the new person hope. My talk tonight, with God's help, is my attempt to help at least one person here tonight. This is my testimony. I ask that you not compare your story to my story, but see if you can relate to the thoughts and the feelings that led to the actions. I will start by telling you I was raised in a family that was very well provided for. We had a house, 2 cars, a boat, a camping trailer, and all the toys that went along with that lifestyle. I had 2 older sisters, 2 younger brothers. My dad was an airline pilot. In his later years, he flew the Prime Minister of Canada all over the world. His job took him away from the family a lot. When I was a boy, the guys would be doing things with their dads, but I was left out a lot of the time because my dad was left out of the country. My mom was a stay-at-home mom with 5 children. All of this left me feeling abandoned and alone. I know that's not the truth, but that's how I felt. I had a lot of trouble in school. I had to repeat grade 1. Then I was pushed along until I failed grade 9. After repeating grade 9, I was told that I could go on to grade 10 only if I switched schools. I never did finish grade 10 because I was expelled for racing my car in the parking lot. I could not read very well, and I could not retain the things that I was taught. I was different from the other children. I can remember in an English class, we were to write a short story and that would be graded. I went home and copied a story out of a book. I wasn't being lazy, I just wanted to do well. I handed it in and the teacher was simply amazed. Again, she asked the class to write another short story. Copying from the book worked so well the first time, I thought I'd do it again. Well, this time it didn't work so good. The teacher knew this story. She had me come to the front of the class, handed me the papers I had written on, and asked me to read it to the class. I tried to read the words, but because of my poor reading skills, my shyness, my insecurity, the words just would not come out. So the teacher took the papers from me and handed me a book and said that maybe I could read the story better from a book. I stood there paralyzed. I had so much shame, guilt, fear, humiliation, embarrassment. I was so paralyzed Couldn't even cry. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I made a decision right there and then that I would do whatever it took to not feel this way again. In my early teens, I thought that if I got a pilot's license, I might attract some affirmation from my dad. I joined the cadet corps and got my pilot's license when I was 16 years old. By that time, I had a car, a driver's license, and now a pilot's license. Boy, in my mind, I was finally a somebody. One night while on the air base, a group of cadets found a hangar door that had been left unlocked. The hangar had 4 CF-100 aircraft in it. One of the cadets decided we should teach them to keep the doors locked. Now, me really wanting to be accepted by the group went along with this, so we pushed the aircraft out onto a dark runway. The aircraft was first noticed when Hercules aircraft was approaching for a landing and the runway lights were switched on. People could have been killed that night. By the grace of God, nobody was hurt, but boy, we were in a pile of trouble. I can also remember one day driving home from the air base and being pulled over by the police for speeding. The officer came up to the driver's side window and he said, "Man, you were really flying back there. Can I see your license?" Well, I had just come from the airport and I had my pilot's license on me, so as a joke, I gave him my pilot's license. The officer thought that was pretty funny and he did not give me a ticket for speeding. Thank God for police with a sense of humor. I did many foolish things to gain what I thought was acceptance. I will tell you a bit about my food addiction and my compulsive eating. I can remember when I was a kid, my mom used to call me Piggy, and that really hurt my feelings. I don't remember being overweight until I was in my early 20s, but by then I was binging all the time. My highest weight was 230 pounds, and I was about 70 pounds overweight. I would diet to lose the weight, and then I would start binging again, and that became my lifestyle. I would eat in secret, and I was dishonest about the money I spent on my secret eating. I was careful to throw away the wrapping papers so no one would know what or how much I was eating, but I was not so careful with the crumbs in the car. So much for my secret, eh? Pornography affected my marriage, and here's a little bit of that history. I had a pornography addiction for many years. Eventually, I started bringing magazines into the home and putting them in my night table. I worked shift work, so I was alone during the day, and I would look at porn to pass the time and live in my fantasy world. Wendy already knew it was an addiction and that she was powerless, so she didn't say anything until the day the kids found my stash of magazines, and then she got upset. A few days later, she told me how she felt about this and that it had to stop. At that time, we were getting ready to come here to Florida, and she said that I had to get rid of those magazines before we left. I kept putting it off, and then one day she told me to bag them all up and we would put them in a dumpster on the way to the border. I had no intention of dumping my magazines. Just before we got to the Canada-US border, Wendy told me to pull the car over. She said she was not going up to that border guard with those magazines in the car. What if we got pulled over and the car got searched? So, what is a guy to do? I got out of the car and I dumped my magazines. Now I'm angry. What is the matter with her? Does she not understand that this is what guys do? Well, when Wendy and I would be walking through the mall holding hands, I would be staring at other women's bodies. She finally told me how hurt she was and how disrespected she felt. This is when I started attending some recovery groups for sex addiction, and I also connected with some Christian brothers who understood my struggles, and they prayed for me, and slowly God healed me in this area. I also had a sex addiction. I was sexually abused at the age of 16 by a married woman. I was immature and I was seeking validation. I thought I found someone who loved me and who wanted me. This experience really, really messed me up for future relationships. I had a son at the age of 20 and a daughter when I was 22, but I never married and never lived with their mother. Eventually, I started to get pressure from her parents to settle down and do the right thing. Well, you might guess, the coward that I was, I ran from that relationship and did not see my children for many years. One evening, my parents invited me over to their home for dinner. While there, the doorbell rang, and it was the mother of my 2 children and her parents. After a very awkward talk, my dad informed everyone that he would be happy to pay for her lawyer expenses to sue me for child support. I felt crushed that my dad would do that to me. When I was 29, I had another daughter, only this time I was married. I spent so much of my time and energy trying to fix and control everything so that I could be okay. She left me when I was 30. She left our daughter in my custody and set out to start a new life. About a year later, she was living with another man who was financially stable, so she was not working. She took me to court asking for custody of our daughter so our daughter would not have to spend her days with a babysitter while I was at work. They were financially well off, she said, and I would not have to pay child support. The court granted her joint custody, but now my daughter would go and live with her mother. So now I only saw my daughter on weekends. Fast forward 1 year, and I'm back in court again. She has decided she needs child support, and the court agreed to it. Then, 6 months later, she goes back to work, and my daughter's back with a babysitter. I can't even describe how I felt. I went into a very deep depression. I'll tell you a little bit now about my drinking. I started to drink at a very young age. My dad always had large supplies of liquor in the house, and I would just help myself to his liquor. I got a kick out of drinking. I got pleasure. I felt escape from boredom. I got a feeling of self-importance, and I felt the companionship of those I was drinking with. Who wouldn't want to drink and find what I found in the bottle? As my drinking got worse, so did my depression. I would drink and drive, and I drank at work. One summer, the Cadet Corps sent me to England for a month, and I came home with a whole suitcase just chocked full of souvenirs, beer coasters from all the bars I had drank at while I was in England. Doesn't everybody do that? Well, you get the picture. Now I'll tell you a bit about my life with Wendy. I soon started dating another lady, still drinking and seeking anything that brought me pleasure. A couple of months after we started dating, she told me that she had taken her kids away from their father because he was an alcoholic, and she was not going to bring any drinker back into their life. I told her that it's not that important that I drink, and that was a lie, but I did quit drinking, and Wendy is still my wife today, only by the grace of God. That was not the end of the story by any means. Without alcohol, I felt anxious, fearful, insecure, overwhelmed, and my existence only got worse. I found out that I was suffering from a disease called alcoholism. I had a body that could not process alcohol, and I had a mind that could not process life. Take away the alcohol, and I was left with the isms of alcoholism. Ism, I-S-M, I, self, me. I, self, me could not cope with life on life's terms. I was trying to control everything so that I would not feel uncomfortable. I later found out alcohol, food, sex, and pornography were not my problems. They were the solutions to cover over the problem. I was seeking anything that would give me pleasure and release from anxiety and fear. Addict that I was, if I found something I liked, I wanted more and more and more. And of course, being an addict, my fuel gauge was broken, and I did not know when to stop or not to start in the first place. Wendy had been in Al-Anon for a few years when I met her, so she was the one that introduced me to the 12 steps. After doing a lot of step work, God lifted the addiction of alcohol, food, sex, and pornography from me and put me in a place of neutrality with them. This means I can be around these substances and I have no desire to use them. I thought everything was good, but no. Now I was told I was codependent. What? What the heck is codependence? Well, I was told codependency was the reason I needed to use the addictive substances in the first place. I was asked 15 questions to see if I had any of these characteristics. 1, feeling responsible for solving others' problems. 2, offering advice even if it isn't asked for. 3, poor communications regarding feelings, wants, and needs. 4, difficulty adjusting to change. 5, expecting others to do as I say. 6, difficulty making decisions. 7, chronic anger. 8, feeling used and underappreciated. 9, people pleasing to be loved. 10, lack of trust in self or others. 11, feeling rejected, being unlovable. 12, feeling like a victim. 13, taking everything personally. 14, lying to myself and making excuses for others' bad behavior. And 15, a general sense of helplessness, anxiety, and depression. Then I was asked to consider 2 more questions. Question number 1, if when I honestly wanted to quit any of these characteristics, and I find I cannot quit entirely, I am probably codependent. Or question number 2, if when I start any of these characteristics, I have little control over how I think, act, or feel, I am probably codependent. For about the first 10 years of my marriage to Wendy, I attended AA meetings occasionally and did not drink. I did not work the steps, and my life got progressively worse. Wendy suggested I start going to meetings regularly and get a sponsor. I thought I'd suffered enough, so I took her suggestion. I met Dick at an OA meeting, and he told me to also go to AA meetings and that he would sponsor me there. It was then that I started studying the steps, the 12 steps. I was working with Dick when he thought it would be a good idea if Wendy and I met with him and his wife for couples sponsoring. Dick already knew Wendy from meetings, so I guess he wanted to see for himself what was going on in my home. And I wanted him to see how hard my home life really was. If he lived with my wife, he would overeat and drink too. Don't get me wrong, Wendy and I had some really good times together. I was not always trying to fix, control, and manipulate, but when I did, usually people would push back and I would end up pushing harder. I did not know why people could not realize that my intentions were good and their lives would be so much better if they only did as I instructed. Could you put up slide number 1 for me, please? I would look in the mirror and all I could see was this perfect man who had it all together, who had all the answers. If people could only see what I saw, this perfect man who had peace and goodwill to all men in his heart. I came to realize later that goodwill is not always God's will. I was living a delusion. I could not see the truth. Standing right there in front of me and I couldn't see the truth. You can take down the slide, thank you. Wendy had started going to church by this time. She came home one Sunday to tell me they have a new pastor and he talks just like us in recovery and I should come to hear him. I go the next Sunday and sit in the last row by the door. This guy comes over and sits down beside me and starts talking to me. I think, nice guy. Then the choir starts to sing, and then this guy gets up, walks to the front of the sanctuary. He's the pastor, and he gives a message I can understand, and God has my attention. One day, Wendy and I went to meet with him and asked him if he'd ever been in recovery. He said no, but thinks there is a need for it in the church, and that Wendy and I should start a recovery ministry. We searched out different resources and we started a group using the 12 steps, a spiritual journey material, and after that, we started Celebrate Recovery. Needless to say, I continued going to church and I was baptized with Wendy at the Gathering Community Church in Ottawa. About that time, I was having trouble sleeping and I went to a sleep disorder clinic for an assessment. The doctor there sent me to an anger management clinic. Go figure, I was not sleeping because I was angry. At that time, I was also put on medication for depression. Working with my sponsor, I got more serious about doing the steps. He said to me that the point of doing the steps was to grow spiritually. not to stop getting angry, not to stop drinking, not to stop looking at porn, but to grow spiritually. And I start that journey by doing the steps. To start, I was asked to consider, 1, am I powerless and cannot manage my own life? 2, can any human power relieve me from my addictions and obsessions? And 3, do I believe God can and will if he were sought? This is steps 1, 2, and 3. 1, I can't. 2, God can. 3, I think I'll let him. Oh, come on. Powerlessness? Unmanageable? Me? Look at me. I thought, I just had to keep trying harder. So my sponsor asked me to answer these questions. Do I have trouble with relationships? Can I control my emotions? Am I vulnerable to misery and depression? Can I make a living satisfactory enough to keep me happy? Do I have a feeling of uselessness? Am I full of fear? Am I unhappy? Do I seem to be unable to be a real help to other people? Now, be honest, he says. Okay, I say. I may have some trouble in some of these areas. No, he says, look at it again. Unless you are 100% powerless and unmanageability in these areas, which is step 1, you will have no need to come to believe in a power in step 2. He said, I would still be relying on my own power. I was told that all of my problems are step 1 problems. If I think I have the power, I will have no need to look anywhere else for power. Remember the prayer in the beginning? God, please enable me to set aside everything I think I know. So I have a thinking problem. Thinking I have the power. Then I was asked, are you ready to quit living like this? The first requirement is step 1. Will I admit powerlessness and that my life was unmanageable? I was then asked if I was convinced that my life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Was I desperate enough to go to any lengths to recover? I was told that half measures availed me nothing. Half measures didn't avail me half, they availed me nothing. Desperation was important for me to understand, because if I was not desperate, I would not be willing to go to any lengths to recover. I finally admitted my powerlessness, and I asked, now what do I do? He said, we go on to step 2. If I was powerless in step 1, now was I willing to believe in a power greater than myself that would fix all, and I was told all, my problems? Well, I went to Sunday school as a child and I believed there was a God, but I couldn't see how he had done anything for me. Poor me, look at my life. I was told knowledge is not enough. I need a personal relationship with God, and I would find that relationship by working the rest of the steps. So Dick took me to step number 3, the decision step. Made a decision to turn my life and my will over to the care of God. Yes, I said care. I was told God cares about me. Seeing as I was not managing my life very well, was I willing to have a new manager? Was I tired of doing God's job, a job I was never meant to do? Now, if I was going to turn my life and my will over to God, I would need more than a belief in him. I would also need to have faith in him. Can you put up slide number 2, please? Let me explain. If I watch a man push a wheelbarrow over Niagara Falls on a tightrope, would I have enough faith to get into that wheelbarrow and go back across? Matthew 17:20 in the NIV, because you have so little faith. Truly I tell you, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you would say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible for you. I ask, how do I find such faith? I am told, do the rest of the steps. Step 3 is only a decision. You can take the slide down, thanks. Step 4 is when the action begins. I was asked to write an inventory. I followed the inventory sheets. I wrote the names. I wrote how they hurt me, how they affected my self-esteem, my pride, my ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and my pocketbook. For a very long time, that was as far as I got. I was the victim. I was to find out later there's a lot more to this inventory. I was asked to consider if I had done the same thing to this person I was resentful at, or anyone else. I was to pray for them. God, this is a sick person like me. How can I be helpful to them? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. Now, here's what blew me away. I was asked on the inventory sheets to write about how and where I had been self-seeking, selfish, dishonest, and afraid. So I did. Now I was asked to look at this in reverse. Could I see how the fear drove the dishonesty, the lies, that resulted in the selfish attitudes which were behind the self-seeking actions? When I looked at this honestly, I could see how my life was just full of fear. If I did not have the fear, I would not be living the lie, which drove the attitude, which drove the actions. I came to realize that I had two very great fears. One, the fear of losing something I already had, and two, the fear of not getting something that I wanted. I was told that if I was living in fear, I was not living in faith. Living out of fear, I hurt a lot of people. There's a whole lot more to this step and the other steps as well that I just don't have time to get into tonight. Step 5, admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. God already knows my defects. Now I'm telling him that I know. If I don't have it, God can't remove it. This step also says exact nature of my defects. I was told when they talk about exact nature, they mean what's going on inside of me. For me, it was fear that drove my unacceptable behaviors. Fear that was on the inside, which nobody could see, drove the actions on the outside that everybody saw. I was a fear factory. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. If it were possible for me to remove my defects, I would have. This step tells me I do not work on removing my defects. My job is to become entirely ready, willing to have God remove them. And I do this by working with my sponsor, who tells me the truth about what he sees going on in my life. Can you put up slide number 1 for me again, please? This is me in the picture. I'm delusional. I can't see the truth standing right there in front of me. I need a godly sponsor to speak the truth into my life. Then what I do with it is up to me and God. But I need a sponsor that's going to speak truth into my life. Okay, you can take down slide number 3, please, and put up number 3. Slide number 3. Remember, in step 1, I was asked if I was willing to admit powerlessness. In step 2, am I willing to come to believe? In step 3, am I willing to offer my life and my will over to a loving God who cares for me? In step 4, am I willing to do the inventory? Step 5, am I willing to admit to God, myself, and another human being the exact nature of my wrongs? Now, in step 6, I am asked if I am willing to have God remove these defects of character. Willingness is the key. Willingness. Step 7, humbly asked him, God, to remove my shortcomings. Do I want these shortcomings, i.e. defects, removed? If so, I ask, I pray humbly. Scripture says I do not have because I do not ask. I was told to pray to have each defect removed one at a time as I became aware of them. Step 8 tells me to make a list of people I had harmed and became what? Willing again to make amends. You can take the slide down, thanks. In my step 12 material, it says, to make amends is to make it like it never happened. So for me, that means I'm sorry is not an amends. I must, to the best of my ability, make it like it never happened. Step 9, I go out and I make the amends guided by my sponsor and the instructions in our material. Steps 10 and 11. Many times 10 and 11 are referred to as the maintenance steps. I was told they are the growth steps. I must constantly be growing in my relationship with God. Matthew 6:33, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. This tells me I must be seeking God first and always. Again, I don't have time tonight to go into this too deeply, but you'll find in your materials good instructions to follow, and I also have a sponsor to guide me. Step 12 tells me, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, I carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all my affairs. I was told all means all. I am to practice these principles in my finances, my family, my relationships, my job, my church, everywhere I go, and everything I do. Just a quick update now. By the grace of God and the 12 steps, I have been able to reconnect with my children, their mothers, and they're all a part of my life today. Now, just a bit about today. I am very active in the recovery community. I sponsor 8 men on a regular basis. I do workshops online right now, and I've just started going back to in-person meetings. I volunteer at a Christian treatment center in Ottawa. While I'm here in Florida, I do weekly Zoom meetings with the men there, taking them through the 12 steps. I go to church regularly. Can you put up slide number 4 for me now, please? Even in recovery, my problems are not completely gone, but with God's help, I am able to rise above them. Today, I do not live in what if, I live in even if. Even if something were to happen, I will be okay, as long as I am God-reliant and not self-reliant. I carry this coin in my pocket as a reminder. Frog, F-R-O-G, fully relying on God. I'll close tonight by saying thank you for patiently listening to my testimony. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you, Wayne, for your transparency. What an amazing testimony. Frog, fully reliant on God, huh? You know, he said something, just what guys do. It just brings to mind, just because everybody does something or it's legal doesn't make it right. The isms, I, self, me. Right? Isn't that the root of all of our problems? We're the one that gets in the way of our relationship with God, gets in the way of relationship with others. And the willing part, you know, it all comes down to will, because we get there, turn our life and our wills over to Christ's care and control. Our will. And goodwill is not always God's will, right? That's what he said. Didn't make that click with anybody else, right? You know, another phrase, the path to hell is paved with good intentions, you know?